Before we jump in on my initial review of the new Olight Oknife Parrot, new pocket knife that was just released, I want to mention that Olight's got a big Black Friday sale coming up. Starts on the 24th, runs through the 29th, and they've got their big deals, free stuff. Note that you can get an extra 10% off on certain items by just entering lastbest in the code area during checkout, and that'll get you a little bit more savings. Anyway, what I'd like to do is jump right into this, and so let's take off. Howdy folks, Doc here with Last Best Tool, and Olight was kind enough to send me this Parrot, which is their new Flipper EDC pocket knife. Now, one of the things that I like about Olight, that I'm actually really impressed about, is that Olight's evolution of knife traits is pretty fast. They seem to be doing things more on a monthly scale than on a yearly scale, like a lot of other companies. Now, that can be good or bad. They aren't like some of the knife companies that seem to, just launch a whole bunch of different products and then just see what people buy and then make more of those. Olight seems to be spending more effort trying to dial in certain knives for certain spaces, and this is definitely the EDC pocket carry space. I've had this about 24 hours and used it a bunch. Of course, I don't have the experience yet I have with many of the other knives, but I can tell you, right away that this is one that should be on your radar. So I just unpacked it out of the box. It comes with a microfiber cloth. Comes with some instructions. This is very, very reminiscent of opening up a new iPhone. But anyway, let's get to the knife part of it. This is a Velcro pouch. Inside here is both the knife and an Olight challenge coin. And what's interesting here is if you look at this, this is actually the knife with the Parrot. It says Oknife folding pocket knife on the back side, Outdoor Elite with their Oknife logo. Heavy duty coin. Kind of nice that they're spending a little bit extra effort trying to make you feel good about the purchase, but you shouldn't need to have any extra help because it's actually a solid knife. It sells for around $60 plus or minus. It comes in two handle varieties. This is the micarta. Micarta actually is a very traditional material for lots of reasons. It's used in knife handles and a lot of other things. First developed around 1910. I think George Westinghouse, yes, that Westinghouse, was instrumental in kind of creating the fabric layers, and then they used sort of resins under heat and pressure to smash the layers, which are fibers, linens, paper even, into a very nice, super durable surface. Other companies use it. Here's a Ontario Knife Company knife with the micarta scales. It usually has a really good feel. Some people really like it. A big competitor to it is G10, and G10 is actually a real modern material that has a lot of properties that we often like in handles of things, especially tools, in terms of solvent resistance, low heat transfer, high tolerance for heat, isn't affected by electricity, things like that. So it's a lateral step, if you will, from micarta. It does have some nicer features, but also it's trying desperately to give you the hand feel of micarta. So what did Olight do, or with their own knives? They make it in both micarta and they make it in G10. So you can choose. The micarta one has a black coated blade, and the G10 has a shiny kind of satin blade. Another thing to note about this is they're using 154 cm, which is a Crucible Industries Supersteel. And it's kind of one of the real popular steels that Benchmade uses. In fact, here's a Benchmade you can see, and on the other side there is your 154 cm. So it's a standard steel in knife making. It's an excellent choice. Basically, it's adding molybdenum to 440 high carbon or 440C stainless is where it came from. But anyway, it's an excellent choice, especially for a blade of this size and using a flat grind, which means they take it from the spine, basically straight down to the blade, no secondary bevel like you'd see on a lot of knives like that. It's a good solid choice. They use a ball bearing pivot system on this thing and a liner lock. It's got stainless steel liners under these micarta scales. It's got a pocket clip here, uses T6 screws and T8s for the rest of the knife. So that looks a little bigger back there now that I look at it. It's supposed to be, maybe it's the same, I'll check. But anyway, this is actually a very thin knife. I thought I'd compare it to the Griptilian Mini. It's not as thin as some of these, incredibly shallow knives, but this has titanium scales, or actually titanium handles, uses a frame lock. This is a liner lock, meaning it's using the liners underneath the scales to lock the blade. It's probably maybe the second safest of the commercially non-copyrighted locking mechanisms. Benchmade often uses their Axis crossbar lock, which actually gives it amazing strength. When you measure the strength for something like that, you're thinking, at what point does it fail? You pretty much have to break the knife for that to fail. Where some of the lockback knives, you can actually apply enough force to pop them loose. So the knife isn't broken, you just overwhelmed the locking mechanism. But here you have to basically collapse something. You break the pivot, or you have to deform the metal in here or snap the handles apart. So either way, you're in trouble. But anyway, uses the 154 CM, which is a nice choice in what they call a sheepfoot blade. Now this is actually, to me, a little bit more like a modified Wharncliffe blade. Wharncliffes you see come out and then have a really sharp drop. Gives you a tremendously strong point, but they don't necessarily cut very well for a lot of tasks. So this is actually a good design, nice full belly, nice clean, you can see that, very nice clean edge, barely see any tool marks. That's totally fine. This one's been sharpened by Benchmade and you can see quite a few tool marks. Here's ZT, you barely see them. So it's comparable to the big boys here. It uses about a 2.5. Let me double check my numbers so I don't mix you guys up here. It is the blade length is 2.6 inches. Sorry about that. The overall length is 6.3 inches, which it puts just short of the Benchmade Griptilian Mini. This is the Mini, and then it's definitely bigger than the ZT. It uses a flipping blade deployment, but what's interesting is this is a very streamlined knife. If you look at it compared to other flippers, let me throw these flippers out here. So this is a Gerber cleaver flipper. This is kind of a utility knife, and actually I really like this for a lot of shop work at the moment. But a lot of the flippers, they run the flipping handle opposite. And in some cases, it rotates completely around and becomes part of the finger guard here. So you would deploy it by holding about in this position and then running your finger straight down. The Olight or Oknife Parrot actually puts the flipping handle up at the top, and what that does is it keeps it from poking you or sticking out of the pocket if you carry it at the back, which most people do. They don't, the back side of the front pocket with the pocket clip. So it actually makes it very smooth, which is a nice touch. So the way you deploy this blade is to, I find I have to hold it a little bit up from the center, and then roll your thumb or your finger around at this point, and then when you release it, you're just sliding your finger back and it pops it loose. So it snaps up quite nicely. Uses the liner lock here, and this is a very easy to unlock, but rock solid. And this particular liner lock, I could see, if you look really close, I can see a little bit of tool mark right there. That's not a bad thing because it's going to get polished out probably with all the liner locking as these two metal pieces slide across. Good solid design, good solid lockup. These are frame locks, but what Gerber does, they put an over travel cover here, which I hate. I'm going to take it off and see what it does, but basically it makes it very difficult to push this out of the way. Even I have to push it up against it tight, but if I don't get my thumb excuse me, all the way to the end, I can't release it. This frame lock here is similar, but you can see that I can push it out of the way. Even if I over travel just a hair, that's not a big deal. I don't know what people were doing here. Maybe they were worried they were going to put pliers in there or something and bend it. But anyway, same with this. This is a frame. These are frame locks. That's probably the strongest lock because you've eliminated the ability for the liner to collapse. So you actually got the whole side of the knife. This is actually a good design. Gives you all kinds of handle choices. When you go to a frame lock, generally you see the opposite. They make a nice handle on one side and then an exposed handle on the other, because that's how they have to handle it. But anyway, so this particular Parrot just came out. It's a solid knife. I can highly recommend it thus far. I've used it for a lot of cutting chores. It doesn't show any wear though. Came factory razor sharp. Also the 154 CM. That's an American steel. So I'm assuming that's where they're sourcing it. And you can see one of the early releases here for the Parrot. It's actually a great name for this thing. Kind of something about the Parrot bill. Short, very strong. It is a little bit narrower, I noticed, than the Benchmade blade, but not by much. The hardness on this thing is around, on the black one, about 58. On the shiny one that they also sell, it's about 60, and that's right in the ballpark of what you want. It means it's going to hold the edge long enough, hopefully, and then it's also going to be possible to easily put a edge back on. If you go much harder, you can get into a brittle edge that chips. It also becomes very difficult and time-consuming to get an edge back on. If it's too soft, then it dulls quickly, but it's fast to get an edge on. So kind of depends on what you want. Now, Olight's really going after the EDC space. They took on initially probably the hardest design, and that's the flashlight with electronics, batteries, user interface, things like that. And they really nailed it. They've dialed in the EDC flashlight space. So now they're going after the EDC knife space, which is, yes, it's a crowded area, but I think a lot of us are restless because we're constantly looking at other new knives. And that means that maybe it's not quite as dialed in as you'd think. So I'm glad to see Olight innovate in this space. I also think it's neat that we can expect new innovation rapidly. We don't have to wait till, you know, an annual trade show or watch the very slow incremental. So, you know, you can get this in other colors now. That's like a giant leap forward versus an entirely new knife. Anyway, thought I'd bring that to your attention. Good solid product. I like that Olight's innovating in this space, and I like that that they are selling these at what's actually a fairly reasonable price. And with that, Doc out.